you start talking, Michelin, level restaurants and things. That's a totally different world. And, I spent some time training at the Greenbrier. And, I remember when I came out of there, I was a beast of a cook, but I was also kind of an asshole, and I was full of shit. And it took me a long time to unlearn all of that. And there's those parts of the industry that it's always going to be kind of reserved for the few and the proud.
Mm-hmm.
That's never going to be meant for everybody. But there's the rest of us. We don't live like that. We don't need to live like that. And the idea of, weeding people out being a good thing, I mean, that was just absurd to me, to read that. Like I was just astonished at how obtuse that comment was, because, this industry, as I put it in the article, we're already ruthlessly efficient at weeding people out.
Mm-hmm.
We're not very good at attracting and retaining people. I mean, this industry has the highest burnout rate of anything.
Yeah.
We don't need more of pushing people away. I mean, we already do too much of that. That's the problem. And as I said, the problem can't be the solution. So that's one of the biggest things that just has to change, is how do we make this more approachable and make it a viable career path, for people that, again, they like to cook, they want to take it seriously, they want to do a good job, but, they don't necessarily want to be in charge. They have a skill set, they want to be paid fairly for it, and, they want to be able to live a decent life, which, I don't see anything wrong with any of that.
Right.
And that's what we have to figure out how we can offer.
That's our guest, Chef Jeremy Leinin from the Dunwoody Country Club in Atlanta, Georgia. And on this episode, he discusses how the pandemic affected his business. He talks about how the industry is facing a crisis with a lack of skilled workers. And after the break, we'll discuss ways in which we can flip the script and focus on the importance of quality of life for the employees in the food service industry. Stay tuned. This is Chef Life Radio, serving chefs just like you who want to enjoy their careers without sacrificing their lives. I'm your host, Adam Lamb, and over my 30-year career as a chef and hospitality professional, I've coached and mentored thousands of culinarians who've led lives of contribution, community, and authentic leadership. Let me be your guide on this journey together, looking for solutions and perspectives to some of the biggest issues impacting the hospitality industry, our lives, and our careers today.
We Chef!
And now, back to the show. Chef, thank you so much for joining us today at Chef Life Radio. Tell me, man, how's business?
It's a little weird these days. Obviously it's been picking up here lately. Everybody thinks the pandemic is over, but obviously, it's not, and it's a completely different set of challenges, for us in the industry trying to come back right now when, everybody's been kind of stuck at home and waiting to get vaccinated, and now, they have, and everybody wants to come back and think everything's back to normal, but we're not quite there yet.
So why don't you give our listeners kind of an overview of how COVID actually affected your business?
So I think it was right around St. Patrick's Day when everything hit the fan, a little over a year ago. We got in, I think it was on Tuesday, and we're told that we're, shutting down, so we spent a couple hours to just clean up a little bit. The initial thought was this was going to last 2 weeks, and then life was going to be back to normal. And obviously it didn't go that way at all. So we ended up, the club was closed entirely for a month. We didn't operate at all. And then we kind of slowly came back with, I think golf was first. And, then we started a very limited to-go program with, kind of one offering per night. It was pretty much management staff only. And then, a few weeks later, we decided to reopen a la carte. But of course, there were, we had restrictions as far as, number of seats and capacity and all that. So it was very kind of staged out and measured. For a while, we were doing a la carte as well as a to-go offering. And, pretty much through the end of the year, we were doing both. And, at some point, we decided that, come January 1st, we weren't, got a cat in the picture now here.
Hello, darling.
But, so we've been a la carte only, since January, and, it's been kind of up and down with, staffing and, and it's not, just us in the kitchen. Obviously front of the house is, having their struggles as well with, there's nights where, unfortunately, we're having to put a cap on, number of people that we can serve because, they've only got 4 or 5 servers on the floor and they need, 10 to be able to run a full service. So, it's been, every week it's a little bit different. We'll have a really good week where, everybody's here and, nobody needs time off or anything like that. And then, the next week it's a little bit slower because, we just don't have the same number of bodies. And then, spring rolled around, obviously graduation season and weddings and all that. I don't know. I can't speak to it quite as much as how it is in hotels and the restaurant business, but in clubs, there's about a 6-week window, between, late April, May, and early June where everybody wants to do everything all at once.
Right.
So, the weather's nice. So golf is busy. People are having weddings. There's graduation parties. The pool opens, and it's pretty much, all systems go all at the same time, which, those few weeks are always some of the most stressful of the year anyway. But then you add, the COVID and, the staffing challenges that we had, and things hit a fever pitch for us there for a minute. So it was a challenge.
And of course, in a club, you've got a clientele that is incredibly vested in their ability to access the facility and make use of all the benefits and stuff. So how, have you found that they're accommodating to the restrictions and the fact that, hey, listen, man, I can't open up a full room. I need 10 staff and I've only got 5.
Initially, they weren't. There was a lot of frustration there in the beginning, and it took us a little bit of time as far as, getting the messaging out there because, initially they don't really understand, one thing, why. And then they initially, some of them, want to think, well, why are you guys having this problem? And it's like, well, it's not just us, it's everybody. Right. And, then once we were able to start, communicating a little bit more and getting some of the word out, having meetings with, some of the committees, getting emails going out to the bulk of the membership, and having some one-on-one conversations with people that, we happen to cross paths with and would ask, then the tide started to turn. And, once we could explain things to people, I started telling people at one point, I had ads up, for various jobs I was offering for a couple of weeks. And at that point, I had more jobs posted than interviews scheduled. Yeah. For one, I couldn't get people to respond to the ads. And even if they did, they wouldn't show up for interviews. I mean, I think one week I had 8 interviews scheduled and one of them showed up, and you just start telling them some of these stories. And then it's like, okay, it's like, yeah, you guys are trying. And well, of course we are. But that just took a little bit of time and, stopping and having those conversations.
And what percentage of your staff do you think you ended up losing over the course of COVID?
To be honest with you, fortunately for me, I didn't really lose too many, with the shutdown. I mean, that was one thing that I was really proud of with the club was the way they really stepped up and took care of the staff that they had. When we shut down for a month, the club paid everybody their full wages that they would normally make. So the club kept everybody whole through that time. And then once, the government got everything together with what they were going to do with, the different bills and this and that. At that point, the club furloughed people, knowing that they were going to be taken care of with the unemployment. But the club continued to pay their health insurance for them so that they wouldn't lose that.
That's pretty righteous.
So, the club did a great job in terms of taking care of the staff that we had. So, I think all told, I only lost maybe 3 people. When we started bringing people back, there were, obviously with there being no banquets, that was really the only area that really hit me. So there were a couple people that I just wasn't able to bring back due to not having banquets. So I run a staff of about 20. So only losing 3, that's not so bad.
No, not at all.
Now, once, we got into things, there's always the issue of retention. I lost a couple people over time, trying to rehire at that point, got to be a little bit of a challenge. But, in terms of just, from the layoff initially, I didn't do too bad.
And one of the things that I really enjoyed was your articles in Club and Resort Chef magazine and on their website. And it's not a magazine that normally, I would come across in my reading. And fortunately, not only you're a prolific writer, but you post a lot on LinkedIn. So I want to say thanks for that, because it's always important to get another person's perspective. So I spent the last couple of years in the healthcare segment in a high quality CCRC in Asheville, North Carolina, with 650 residents. So I totally get that kind of expectation that the campus might necessarily have, which kind of brings me to some of the questions I had in reading your stuff, if you don't mind me going there, right?
Sure.
So I guess the first article that I wanted to talk about was one titled "How Did We Get Here?" And you brought out some really great salient points, but there's a couple lines at the end of the very first paragraph that says, others say the food service industry is about to reinvent itself in this aftermath. That's normally a hopeful outlook, but I don't share it. My gut feeling is that the industry is about to have the proverbial screws put to it again. So can you expand on that a little bit?
It's interesting. I wrote that a little over a year ago when all this first started. And I guess fortunately, I have maybe changed my tune on that just a little bit. But at the time when I wrote that, my fear at that point, and there's still a little bit of it, is that this industry has always been expected to do more with less. All the time. I mean, it's hyper competitive. If you have to cut staff, everybody just has to do more work to deliver on the same expectations. So, given just, the history of this industry, at least, in the, 17 years that I've been doing it, my gut reaction at the time was that we were going to, have to gut our staffs and still find a way to do everything that we always had to do anyway. I think I have seen some positive trends since then that give me a little bit more optimism, at least for the industry as a whole. You get into, clubs versus, the rest of it all, they're two very different conversations.
Sure. But speak to some of the expectations that maybe have changed, or the outlook that's changed for you.
For one thing, the way that we've reacted to, the short staffing that we've had, like I was talking about here a minute ago with, having to open the pool and all that stuff. I remember we were 2 weeks away from opening the pool, and I looked at, the clubhouse manager, who's my superior, and I said, I got to open this pool in 2 weeks, and I have no idea right now how I'm going to do it. Because at that point, the only person that I had to be able to staff my pool cafe was, one of my lunch cooks, who I could afford to lose, but the pool's a 6-day-a-week operation, and that was the only person that I had. So, fortunately, I had a very brief exchange. I can't even remember how it came up, but on LinkedIn with, certified master chef Gerald Ford, and he made a suggestion about, just put a plan in writing and give it to your superiors, and, to let them know, what the problems are, what potential solutions you have, and what you're doing about it. And so I did just that. And I didn't expect them to necessarily let me do any of what I suggested. And they said yes to all of it. So instead of, the pool being open 6 days a week, we're only open 5. Instead of being open for service 8 to 9 hours, we're only open for 6. So, in the interim, I have been able to staff it with just one person. So that was huge, and previously, and it's, not a complaint against my club. I think it's just the nature of being a chef is, I could have talked about, the problems or the challenges all day, and it's like, make it happen. That's what you're here for, is to figure it out.
Sure.
So seeing, some of these compromises happen and the willingness to respond and, kind of change with, what we're dealing with, that has made me kind of change my tune about things, pretty significantly.
Do you think that that's obviously that's enlightened leadership, man, that would actually listen and take all into account? You think that's an expected response industry wide, or you think there's still those folks out there yeah, I don't care how you get it done, chef, but it's got to happen?
I mean, there's always going to be that. I've worked. I mean, this is the third club that I've been in, so I've worked under 4 different GMs at this point, and they're all different, and I've seen different mentalities. So, I mean, you're always going to have that. But I think, moving forward, just with, the way this industry kind of has been, and, we've known that this was coming for a while. I mean, this isn't as new as people think it is. We've heard the train on the tracks for a long time, and it's here. And so I think the people that don't necessarily want to hear this stuff, they're going to have to hear it, and they're going to have to figure out how to deal with it, whether they like it or not.
So are you talking specifically about labor shortages or just inability to attract quality applicants, or what specifically are you talking about?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's any big secret. I think, this business is tough, and, being a cook's hard work, and it's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay very well. And, I've known far too many people that are skilled workers. I'm not talking about, some high school kids that fold T-shirts at a department store on the weekends to have a little spending money. I mean, these are skilled professionals that are having to work 2 jobs just to not live in poverty. And I think people have to face the facts of, why would somebody want to do that? You can talk about passion all you want to, but, why should somebody want to be passionate to live that way?
Right.
And I think that's the crisis this industry has to figure out. And that's really what we're up against right now.
So another question based on another article you wrote, how we're reacting to the labor shortage madness. But first I have a little comment. And so I'm just asking, is this really madness, or is it kind of inevitable consequence of how, like, we as an industry have squandered human capital, for a really, really long time?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It absolutely is a consequence. I mean, like I was saying a minute ago, most chefs have been talking about this for a while. Like this isn't new. We've known it was coming. Right. There have just been too many people that just haven't wanted to deal with it.
And so in your experience or your observation, how are most operators dealing with this issue? How are friends of yours and other segments of the industry dealing with this?
Obviously pay rates are going up, which is a good start, but I think it's going to take a whole lot more than that. There's a lot of conversation that I'm hearing as far as, things that are going to happen, some changes, just as far as, schedule demands and, being able to get somebody a Saturday off every once in a while, not because they're going on vacation, but it's just, here, why don't you have Saturday off so you can see your family? Just quality of life stuff. There's a lot of conversation about that. I don't know how much that's happening. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that that's something that I've been able to start doing. It's not. I'm not there yet, but I think that's kind of one of the key things for this industry is, your kid's got a soccer game on Saturday. You might not be able to make all of them, but you should be able to go once in a while, without having to, request a day off and burn a vacation day to do it. So a lot of it's those types of things. Obviously, the pay rate stuff is huge, but it's the having to be so detached from your family and your home life all the time that's really the silent killer in this industry.
I live in Asheville, which is, a beautiful place in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Mm-hmm. And it's such that, I don't know anybody who works 2 jobs who can afford to live in Asheville. So where do these people come from? As a matter of fact, I spent 25 years in South Florida, and Key West got so bad that they were actually the city was sending a bus 4 hours up the overseas highway to the nearest town so people could board a bus to drive 4 hours to work an 8-hour shift and then go back 4 more hours because there's just nowhere for these folks to live on what they were getting paid. So cooks, professionals, folks who probably have no more larger aspiration than to do the best job they possibly can to take care of their family without, climbing the company ladder or for any other aspiration other than, to be considered a good person. And I think you made a comment in one of your articles that, if someone's here for a paycheck, that's probably not said in a complimentary fashion. But, I've known some really, really amazing people who, all they wanted to do was just come in, do their shift and go home. They didn't want to get involved in the politics. They didn't necessarily want to get involved in anything else. So can you sing some praises about, the folks who just come and do their job and want to leave?
Right. My morning prep ladies in banquets, they're both from Mexico, and, they're not necessarily there to set the world on fire. They're not, trying to be the next Escoffier or anything like that. But they come in, they do what they're asked to do. They do a really good job. Whatever you show them, They're happy to do it. And, ultimately they want to be able to put food on the table, take care of their family. And they want to do a good job. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I've been around a lot of chefs and a lot of people in this business for a long time that, look down on, people like that. I've heard, people talk about, they'll say, oh, God, that guy's a 35-year-old saute cook. And it's like, well, so, I mean, so what? He doesn't want to be the chef. Like it's not for everybody. And, ultimately, if the guy's a 35-year-old saute cook and he does a good job at it, what's the problem? The industry needs those people too. And we've got to quit
shitting on them.
Right. And it's kind of this whole thing where, we make people live in a meat grinder for a long time to, prove their value. And then eventually they get paid a decent amount of money. And it's like, well, but again, it goes back to why should somebody want to do that? Because people aren't lining up to want to do this for a living. So, we've got to get out of that mentality, because eventually, we can't just keep weeding people out. There's not going to be anybody left.
Do you think we do a particularly good job at training our people? And I'm not talking about training somebody on saute to the menu. I'm talking about building skill sets once a month when, things might be slow, and bringing in a whole swordfish and having everybody going and go up, boning it out, things like that. I mean, how do we grade as far as, prior to the 80s, one of the main ways you learned was to become an apprentice. And then all of a sudden that dried up with the advent of, 1-800-BE-A-CHEF and all the for-profit schools. And it's like, after that, it seems like everybody just went, okay, we don't have to worry about that shit anymore. They're gonna come to us with all the skills that they need, or else, right?
Right. Well, I mean, interestingly enough, I listened to the interview between you and Paul Sorgel, and you guys had talked about this, and I think he hit the nail on the head with just the fact that this industry doesn't invest in its people like it used to. I mean, that was one thing about the Greenbrier with the apprenticeship there. How much product they were willing to let you screw up to learn how to do things. I mean, most operations just can't afford to do that.
That's true.
And, it's one of those things that I rail against in my current operation. I've been there 5 years, and when I got there, only sous chefs were allowed to cut meat. So, of course, nobody else knew how to do it.
Right.
And, it was pretty much one of those things from day one. I said, no, this stops, because I am not having this where there's only 3 of us here in the building that know how to cut fillets or know how to, cut salmon or whatever it is. I mean, it's just silly. And, of course, everybody kind of recoiled at like, well, what if they screw it up? It's like, well, I mean, you screwed it up a few times and that's how you learn, right? I mean, it's the cost of doing business. And, in the long run, if somebody screws up, 5 or 6 sides of salmon before they start getting a handle on it, grand scheme of things, it's not that much money.
Right.
Like it's okay. And it kind of goes to one of those memes that I've seen, and I forget where I saw it at, but it was, it's the CFO and the CEO talking to each other, and the CFO says, well, what if we invest in our people and they leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't invest in them and they stay?
Right.
That's kind of the crossroads of that whole thing.
How do you think, let's fast forward or project ourselves in the future for a moment and say that, there's a significant enough portion of the industry that's made these changes, who've, worked on creating, empowering culture, who've, invested in training programs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how many generations are we going to lose in the meantime? Millennials are the millennials I've worked with, who, for the most part, are really, really hard workers, but they're also very, very cut and dry when it comes to, like, this is not really fitting my lifestyle. This is not really working for me. I'll see you later. And boom, they're out the door. Whereas my generation was more like hanging on dear life, because of the thought, like, where the hell are you going to get your next paycheck from? So I think somewhere in the middle, there's probably a good balance. But I guess I would ask, what are your hopes for the future for the industry?
That's a tough question to answer, because I see the industry changing pretty dramatically, and a lot of it's kind of started already with just a shift toward casual dining. which, on one hand, it's interesting seeing what people are doing with quick service restaurant concepts and, how you can take good food and make it quick and easy and it's fast and people can be in and out in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Dining doesn't have to be a 90-minute affair anymore, which, again, that it's interesting, some of the, possibilities that are there, but it at the same time, coming up, the way I have, and I'm sure the way you did, there's a certain amount of romanticism in me that, really appreciates, the theater of fine dining and, what all goes into it. You watch a classical hotline in action. It's almost like a ballet. Like, I mean, there's something about it. I'm hoping that doesn't have to go away, but it as dining gets more and more casual, I'm wondering if all that stuff is going to get to be more and more of a niche offering. Obviously with the pandemic, we had to limit human interaction and we got taught to, you go to a restaurant and you'd scan a QR code and you'd order from your phone. So, I mean, I don't know how that's going to carry over into the next few years. I mean, is that something that's going to stick around just for the sake of efficiency, or are people going to push back against that and say, no, I go out to eat because I want the service and I want the interaction. I don't know, right. But I think the good thing is that at least hopefully there's a lot of this stuff that, has put the industry in the position that it's been in, where it's gotten so hyper competitive with, everybody trying to undercut each other. And, you can go in somewhere and demand that they do something that they don't really do. And, they'll do it just because they don't want you to leave. Right. And they'll do it for $1 less than where you say you usually get it from, just because they don't want you to leave and they want you to come back. That has not done the industry any favors. I mean, we consistently devalue our own product and our own skill set. Like, that isn't sustainable. So I hope that type of thing goes away. And I hope that, restaurants get to be, more efficient. And I'm hoping that, some of the understanding that consumers have had, due to what we've dealt with here lately, I'm hoping some of that sticks around so that, we're not constantly kind of backed into that corner that we are a lot of times. Right. So I think those are a couple of the biggest things that I would say.
So you wrote an article called Take Charge of Your Career, which I thought was really interesting. You've got like 6 lessons, but it almost seems like they're principles for anybody who wants to have a more fulfilling career. And one really spoke to me, and I was curious to know if you would expand on this idea of servant leadership. I think for the culinary world, that's something that's a little different than what most people are used to. There's all the memes about, the screaming chef and all that kind of stuff. So how do you embody servant leadership at your organization?
Well, I really try to avoid, that whole top-down approach of a traditional chef where, the chef writes all the menus and the chef, has the final answer on everything. And I really want it to be a lot more collaborative than that. So, I have sous chefs, in each area. I've got, my chef de cuisine in the restaurant. I've got, 2 sous chefs that share banquets. And I really try to work with them on, what we're doing in those areas. And I want their input, and I want them thinking about, ideas that they have, ways that we can do things better. I don't want to just be giving them directives all the time. I want to hear from them. And, I really want that to be their area that I'm kind of help coaching them to run versus, they're working for me and I'm just telling them what to do. I mean, that's really the last thing that I want. And so, really when it comes to the day-to-day in those areas, I want them to, really feel like they own it and they're in control of it. And, if there's something that I can do to step in and help them, could be to dice an onion. It could be to clean some fish. Right. I mean, whatever it is, I'm happy to step in and help them to do it and make sure that they're successful because, at the end of the day, when you're in a leadership position, your success is going to be defined by the success of your subordinates. So, I'm there to make sure that they're successful and that they look good because, if that happens, I'm going to look fine versus, rather than, me standing on top of them and micromanaging and giving directives on every little thing. Especially if it's somebody that wants my job eventually, that's not really a good way for them to ever learn how to do it.
Right. And so you're coaching them. Are you coaching them in what it looks like for servant leadership so that they're actually going into their areas and maybe being collaborative with the hourly associates that are in those areas?
Yeah, that's one of those things where, there's always a certain amount of autonomy with each person that is learned or earned rather. Obviously, if we're cooking a piece of fish or whatever it may be, obviously, this is a result that we need to have. But as far as the process and how we get there, let's work together on what the best way is to do that. Because, I could tell you how I would do it, but, if you're the guy that's got to work that station every day, I need you confident in how you're going to do it. So if there's a way that we can, compromise and work together on how we get there, I get the end result that I need to have, and you're confident and comfortable with how you're doing it. We all win with that. So
that's awesome, man.
Man, it's how I try to go about it.
And so if you were going to give one or two tips, maybe that you've learned through COVID to anyone listening on how to build a better brigade, how to manage, what were those two things that has most served you?
Probably one of the biggest things is, just being patient. This whole thing's been a process. There's been days that haven't necessarily gone the way we want them to. So you have to just kind of keep things in perspective and not get too worked up over, one day, not necessarily, going exactly according to plan. Tomorrow's a new day. We get to start over. Don't get too high or too low on stuff. And, one thing that I always keep in the back of my head is just the concept of nonlinear progression. Things don't always move up and to the right in a straight line. Today, like I said, today may not go the way we want, but we can get back to work tomorrow. We can get this going the way we need it to. So just be patient, and let things play out. Give it some time. And then, the other thing is don't get too worked up on the small stuff. If we miss one little thing, hey, we missed one little thing. That's it. Let's just keep moving forward. I mean, in a nutshell, those are kind of the two biggest things that have kind of helped me maintain sanity, through it all.
That's awesome, Chef. That's great wisdom. And especially in a commercial food service environment, things we, at least in my experience, forget pretty quickly. So appreciate you putting that out there. And if you got some time, man, I'd like to invite you out to the back dock. And for those listeners of the podcast, we make sure that we get a little snippet, about 15 minutes of conversation that really kind of goes to the heart of who people are. Thanks for being here, Chef. I really appreciate everything you brought. And, keep writing, because you got a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of people who could benefit from that. So thank you.
I appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of Chef Life Radio. If you enjoyed it, it made you think, laugh, or get pissed off, then please tell a friend. Get your free copy of 3 Ideas for Less Chef Stress by signing up for our monthly newsletter at chefliferadio.com/sign up. Here at Chef Life Radio, we believe that working in a kitchen should be demanding. It just shouldn't have to be demeaning. It should be hard. It just doesn't have to be harsh. We believe that it's possible to have more solidarity and less suck it up sunshine, more compassion, less cutthroat island. We believe in more partnership and less put up or shut up, more community, and a lot less fuck you. Finally, consider for a second, for all the blood, sweat, and sometimes even tears we put into what we do, really, at the end of the day, that's just some brown stuff on a plate. None of it really matters. It doesn't define you as a person or make you any more special or less than anyone else. It's just a dance we're engaged in, so we might as well laugh and enjoy every bit of it, even the crappy parts, while we're doing it. Or didn't you know that the purpose of your life should be to enjoy it?
Like it, Hefe. I fucking love it. I am humble. The goddamn Glory Foxwell don't live on now.
Follow us at Facebook.com, Chef Life Radio, Twitter at Chef Life Radio, on Instagram at Chef Life Radio, and check out our website, chefliferadio.com.
Oh, yes, Chef.
Stand tall and frosty, brothers and sisters. Until next time, be well and do good. Leave the light on, honey. I'm coming home late. This show was produced, recorded, and edited by me, Adam Lamb, at the Dish Pit Studios in Bartow, North Carolina. This has been a production of Realignment Media.